station where unknown forces strike the edge of ecology.
I'm very, very aware that there are some new people here tonight, and it's not fair just to dive in without giving a little bit of context. So I'm going to start with like a 5-minute, very, very fast and Bert Janssen-like manic presentation, just to give you the brief history of crop circles. Because if you don't, there's always 2 or 3 people who say, yeah, but what's it all about? You've just shown this year's formations, but you haven't actually said where it's all coming from. So with that in mind, I thought that I would just take you back to basics as a little sort of entry point to what you're then going to see, which is obviously firmly focused on this year. So it's in 3 parts. We'll do that first, then we'll look at what happened in the UK this year in the fields, and then we'll end by just having a look at some of the best of what's been going on around the world. Because it is a global phenomenon, even though for some reason England is very much at the core of it. So that's what we're going to do, so hold on tight. So let's start by just having a little bit of a very fast look back at what this is all about. So, crop circles have been around for many years, hundreds of years. I mean, this is the famous illustration from 1678, which certainly appears to describe a crop circle, with the devil making it in the middle. It's not the only one. There are several hundred historical accounts of crop circles. The earliest photograph that we have is 1932. So we know that this is not just some modern prank. It's been going on for a long time. But it was really around the 1970s that we began to see more interest going towards them. And back then, this was pretty much what we had, literally crop circles. And of course, one of the big things will be the evolution of the shapes. But back then, they were small, they were round, and it was generally assumed that it was the weather, and that it was a strange, whirlwind or something like this. But of course, that then didn't hold good after a while, because they started to get more sophisticated. So when they then started to turn into symmetrical patterns, of course, the arguments began to change. And this, of course, was where the UFO world became interested. And some surmised that maybe some kind of craft had landed in the field and left this marking. And others began to talk about UFOs and the potential of an extraterrestrial force being at work, because there was a strange connection with strange lights. And there are so many videos and images of weird lights hovering over the crop circles that for some, this denotes some kind of intelligent force. Others think that it's a natural phenomenon like ball lightning, but whatever it is, it seems to be drawn to this phenomenon. And I've seen these lights for myself, back with Martin and Gorilla back in 1993 down in Wiltshire, so I can vouch that this is a real phenomenon, but what they are is another thing altogether. Of course, still greatly argued about. But it led people to think, well, maybe there's more to this than meets the eye. And then, of course, when 1990 brought these things, and it turned almost overnight into these long hieroglyphic shapes, well, obviously everything changed. And this was the year when we had huge media coverage and lots of discussion about what it meant, and big newspaper articles and TV programs. And of course, research teams were up and running and trying to look at this in great detail and realising that this really did demand more investigation. And the way the crop was laid down was important. I mean, it's not just a mess of tangled stalks. There's real beauty at every level, a remarkable lack of damage to the stems in so many cases. And you get weaving and layering and knotting that does not seem consistent with the idea, always put about by the media, that they're all man-made. And indeed, when you look at man-made formations, and here's one, you will often find a lot of damage that you just don't seem to find it in so many formations. So for some, there is a difference. Not quite a litmus test, but breakage to the stems and mud and dirt and crushing is something that you look for, and sometimes you just cannot find it at all. And indeed there is a lot of evidence that there are biological anomalies occurring inside the circle-affected plants themselves. People like William Levengood here did a lot of good work, certainly back in the 1990s, finding changes. The embryonic seed heads seem to be mutated. The nodes, those knuckles you get on wheat and barley, seem to be elongated or sort of abnormal in some way. And you can't replicate this by crunching it down with a piece of wood. Heat, probably in the microwave spectrum, would seem to be, I think, the most likely explanation, but it doesn't explain where that comes from or what the trigger for that is. And there's also lots of other good work, not just by Levengood, by people like Eljo Hasselhoff, really worth looking it up. The skeptics, of course, say this is all a load of rubbish and all these people are making it up. But what's interesting is when skeptics attack the crop circle science, they never attack the evidence, they attack the people. And they try to ridicule their reputations, they never address what they've actually found. Well, that's all you need to know, because if you could, well you would, and they don't. They ignore the evidence, what they do is attack the personalities. So, inside they're amazing, but from a distance, of course, they are particularly amazing. And by 1991, the arguments have moved into what is the symbolism about this? Surely it must be symbolism, for some at least. Was it alien? Was it religious? Was it occult? Was it alchemical? Well, who knew? But geometrically, they were being made with a great sophistication. And, there have been whole books and websites and theses devoted just to the geometrical properties of crop circles. This stuff is really sophisticated. It isn't what you do when you fall out of the pub at midnight. Okay? This nonsense that you keep hearing, that is madness. Even if they were all man-made, that's not how it's happening. There's something which is really being careful, it's planning, and mathematically it is sublime, and we can't do that any justice tonight. This is a very mathematical pattern from 1991, and it's a chaos theory pattern, a fractal, the kind of shape that scientists will generate on a computer using purely natural mathematics to show how the universe produces geometrical structure without the need for a mind. And so for this to appear as a crop circle, and other fractals in the years since, made some think, well, maybe there is a natural component at work. If that doesn't explain them all, that's one thing, but there may be something here that is to do with the Earth. Well, then, of course, this story arrived, and Doug and Dave, the first big hoax claimants, came along and said they'd made them all. But luckily, it was bollocks, so we could just forget about that. And as soon as they made some for the cameras, it was obvious that they were just lying. They came and went, but the phenomenon didn't. And there's been lots of tests of man-made formations. Here's a field of man-made formations made in '92. What it shows is that, yes, of course you can make a certain kind of shape in a field, obviously. And some crop circles are man-made. Everybody accepts that. But when you put people to the test to get anything as sophisticated as some of the ones that we see with the same qualities and the changes to the crop and the weaving and the layering, now that seems to be something else altogether. And they take a very long time to make. It seems to take 6 hours plus to make an average man-made formation, when we know many designs have appeared within very short periods of time, sometimes in daylight hours, and I'll give you an example in a second. So, yes, there are man-made formations. Does that explain them all? Almost certainly not. But you have to make up your own minds as to which ones you think are which. It's certainly not for me to tell you that, unless I happened to be standing there when somebody was making it, or an alien was making it. You have to look at the evidence and see what fits right with you. Now, by the time we got to '94, we began the extraordinary designs, literally astronomical stars, planets, alignments, predicting interesting dates. No time to go into that tonight. Some even seem to anticipate, like this one, solar activity. How could that be? As if something knew what was going to happen in the future. And also that year we had this, still one of the most beautiful formations. And, one thing to bear in mind looking at all these is that the thing is you have only got one chance to get this right. You don't get a practice. If somebody made practice formations, we would find them. Well, we don't. And no evidence where anybody's tried to scrub them out. And you've only got to go wrong once, you mess up the pattern, well, that's that. Because the geometrical error is going to be stuck in there. You can't suddenly make the crop stand up again. And yet, when you consider there have been now over 10,000 recorded formations, that's quite a lot, isn't it? If they were all man-made, you would expect to see human error more than we do. So this is again something that you really have to think about. They're just on paper alone, it's a struggle to draw some of these, and then we see them at hundreds, sometimes thousands of feet across. Now this is a very famous formation which arrived at Stonehenge in 96, and there of course is Stonehenge, and there's the A303, both busy sites. This isn't a field that tilts visibly down towards the tomb. It's 915 feet long, it's another fractal, it's got 151 circles in it, and it arrived within 45 minutes. Unless you're a skeptic, in which case they say no, it was made at night and was there all day and nobody spotted it. Even though it was in full view of the road and Stonehenge. John Ronson manages to re-quote this lie in his latest book, apparently. We know the field was empty all day, because we have the testimony of a pilot, the Stonehenge security staff, several of them, and the farm manager, who know nothing was in that field all day. And yet shortly after 6 o'clock, there it was, people running inside to have a look. And there are other formations which we know have appeared in short windows of time in daylight hours. And if you try to make that there, you're going to be seen, aren't you? Well, nobody was seen. But there is a lady that claims she witnessed this formation appearing out of nowhere under a strange mist. Well, she's not alone. There are numerous eyewitness accounts over the years of people who watch these things coming out of nowhere within seconds, often with light phenomena, sometimes with a high-pitched whistling or trilling sound. So all of these things need to be taken into account because this is important evidence. But, of course, the skeptics say they're all lying. Every one of them's a liar, and they've all made it up because we say they're all man-made, and that's the end of it. And then you talk to some of the skeptics, like Professor Chris French, and then he will be there on TV debunking crop circles, and you say, have you ever been in one? Answer, no. But that tells you all you need to know. So, they got more sophisticated, they kept growing, and, experiments were done. And a firm of US architects, for instance, was set a task, if they had to recreate this particular formation working at night, how long would they need? They calculated they would need a week and 3 days. Now, I think that's way too liberal, but nonetheless it goes to show you don't just knock this up in a couple of hours. And, when you try to, well, it's just not the same. Now, this, would you believe, is man-made. Made for Mitsubishi for a TV advert in 1998 by the same guys that make many, or if not most, of the TV crop circles. What's interesting here, though, is given that they had no need for stealth, they paid the farmer, it was all done above board, this took 2 days to construct. 2 days. So you then compare that to the others which appear in very short periods of time, and you realise you're dealing with a different phenomenon. And then when you get ones like this, of course, well, you're really into other territory. In fact, even one of those same guys said he could not see how this could have been made in one night. So that tells you something. And it was. On a night of pouring rain. It's 800 feet across, has 409 circles, and it's still a record as far as I know. And yet the next morning, even though it was wet and very stodgy in that field, it was clean, it was pristine, not a muddy footprint in sight. You try walking in a wet crop circle and see how quickly you will trip mud all over it. And yet so many occasions where you might expect that, you don't find it. This, of course, then raised the stakes even more. In 2002, we had this great big picture of an alien. You can't see it? Well, when you blur it, then you can see it. And, of course, this was on a whole other level of sophistication because it looked like Mr. Alien. Some couldn't take it seriously and said, well, it's obviously just a big joke. But anybody that knew anything about just the construction of art said, whoa, no, this is really genius. And the fact that this has never been replicated in any man-made experiment or anything near this level of sophistication since tells you quite a bit. And indeed the disc of dots and dashes that the creature is holding is in fact a disc of binary code rendered in a form known as ASCII. And of course ASCII can generate text on a computer. So this turned out to be the one and only direct message in text in a crop circle, which, for those of you who've forgotten what it says, reads, beware the bearers of false gifts and their broken promises. Much pain, but still try and believe there is good out there. We oppose deception, conduit closing. You can read it yourselves. Basically, it's a warning, but it also offers some hope. And of course, there was great discussion about it. Was it from beings like this? Was it about beings like this arriving? Was it a warning about our own governments? Well, why not? As the years go by, it certainly makes you wonder, or indeed the New World Order. So the years rolled by, and then we got this running theme that gradually crept in of 2012. This is one of the formations that has references to Mayan symbolism here, Sumerian, Egyptian. There have been a number of formations which have clearly denoted 21st of December 2012 or something to do with that ancient time cycle. If you don't know what that's all about, you've just arrived here tonight out of the blue, cutting a long story short, many ancient cultures recorded a cycle of time that was 5,125 years. And they had various prophecies and predictions which said when the time period ended and then began again, there would be huge upheaval, transformation, big change. And that's why people are talking about 21st of December 2012, because that's the turning of the next cycle. Now, of course, some are saying, well, it's the end of the world. Actually, virtually nobody's saying that. There is a Mayan prophecy that does refer to that, we won't deny that, but you can take that on a number of levels. Most of the prophecies talk about change. And who said it was all going to happen on one day? It might take decades or even centuries to really see the shape of the change. It was about the beginning of a period of shift. And so this is maybe what we're just about to enter into. So don't be disappointed if you wake up on the 22nd of December and you haven't gone to the fifth dimension. Because maybe it's going to take a bit longer than that. By the way, this was the first formation that ever got reported in connection with the 2012 phenomenon in the tabloids. And this got reported as the Doomsday Crop Circle. But at least that was the first time, in fact, the 2012 phenomenon actually got a lot of coverage. So it set tongues wagging, it set thoughts rolling, and that's what crop circles do. And yet the newspapers can't help themselves. They debunk every year or tell you that it's all gone away, fallen victim to a serial killer. Never heard that joke before. But, I mean, it's an interesting one, that what you read about the crop circles is always very unrepresentative of the reality. You cannot trust what you are told in the media. And the reality is, well, it's still going on. And as the years roll by, different themes are explored, new sophistication, geometry, which is just astonishing. And here's another reference to 2012. This appeared in 2009, showing our whole solar system, as it will be this year, on 21st of December 2012, with only what was presumed to be Pluto not quite in the right place. Now, is that a mistake? Is it trying to tell us something? Is it not Pluto? Some say it's Nibiru, or some weird wandering planet that's going to come in and destroy us all. Well, who knows? But an interesting one nonetheless, and the rest of it is stunningly accurate. So this 2012 phenomenon is obviously very important to whatever's creating these. Life forms, jellyfish, dragonflies, birds, trilobites. In 2009 we had a lot of sort of life forms. And some felt this was trying to call our attention back to the natural world, which of course is in trouble at the moment. So some think there's a kind of an eco message behind some of them as well. But you know, when we get a phenomenon that could do things like this, frankly, anything is now renderable as a crop circle. And this was very clever. It implies three-dimensional form by cross-hatching certain areas of the crop to give light and shade. So, you know, it really now has reached a level where if it wanted, it could try just about anything. And so last year came along, and it was a quieter year than some. But nonetheless, still some interesting formations. Some wondered if it was the calm before the 2012 storm. Others wondered, well, is it the beginning of a slow petering out? Maybe this is going to be the end for the phenomenon. Well, that we can't say, of course, because we're still only in 2012. But we can say that this year brought interesting formations, albeit not quite the end of the story that some were wondering about. So, briefly, before we get on to those formations of this year, well, of course, what's it all about? Because we've got this history of all these formations, but what the hell's making them? So, you know, is it extraterrestrials? Some think it's a message of communication made gently feeding us subliminal encoded information built up year upon year. Strange lights, yes, they're a part of this. There have been objects like this seen over fields, beaming these things down. Who can say? So for some, it's a message from an intelligence, or trying to wake us up to evolve by just sort of stimulating us with shape. But on the other hand, there is also a geological connection. If you look at where crop circles tend to cluster, they love underground water. Particularly in England, they love chalk. Here are the main regions of chalk in southern England, and there, these red dots denote the biggest concentrated areas of where crop circles appear. And you can immediately see that's not an accident. And the interesting thing is there's lots of counties outside of these areas full of crop fields that do not get crop circles, or very few. So there's something in the ground that is helping to determine where these things appear. That is not an accident. And of course you can see here the biggest concentration is in Wiltshire, particularly around the village of Avebury, of course, as many of you will know. So those that work with earth energies and dowsing, and here's the late David Russell, very good old friend of ours, they said for years crop circles appear near strong underground water sources and natural earth energies, and that it's all tied up with that, and that the phenomenon to a degree has a natural component in as much as it's part of the earth energy grid. Now that doesn't rule out other intelligences being involved, although some think some are natural and some are, if you like, nudged into more complexity by a consciousness from somewhere else. The Earth is changing. We have climate change of some kind or another, whatever you think is causing it, and as you know, there's lots of arguments about that. But we're also undergoing magnetic changes. The Sun is doing very big, strange things. There's lots of concerns and predictions about what the Sun is going to do in the next 2 or 3 years, and of course next year is the peak of the current sunspot cycle. And NASA is putting out very loud warnings, if you wish, that we need to beware of a huge solar flare because potentially it could knock out the world's electrics in one go. And then what? Well, it's going to then be particularly interesting, isn't it? But equally, some say waves of electromagnetic energy from the Sun could be the very thing that rewrites our DNA, that actually starts to take us up to that new level of consciousness that some of the prophecies say that mankind will attain when this change occurs. So maybe the ancient time cycle was all about wider solar cycles and other cosmic cycles, and we're going to obviously have a more gradual shift, but nonetheless we will see something occurring. And I don't think anybody is going to deny something's changed in the world in the last few years. There's certainly a feeling of old certainties no longer being there. Of course, there's the other view that they're all made by us, psychically, not manually, and we ourselves here in Sussex, back in the mid-90s, did a lot of work using psychics like Paul Bura and working with them, and we found there was an interactive quality to the phenomenon. Lots of people have chosen shapes they wanted to appear as crop circles, sat in a room, visualised them appearing, and lo and behold, they have. And here's just a few formations where that seems to have occurred, or there's been some interactive quality, and these were the ones that were particularly interesting to us for reasons which you can read about elsewhere. So for some, the whole thing is some weird psychic matrix where our collective thoughts are somehow throwing out these strange archetypal shapes into the fields. It's something, of course, you can't entirely rule out. And at the end of the day, others say it's rutting deer, rutting hedgehogs, or even God. And who can say, other than, if it is rutting hedgehogs, goodness me, I'd like to know their movements, because, well, they're doing quite well. All of this means we absolutely have no idea what makes them or what it's all about. But, goodness me, aren't they, A, beautiful, and B, persistent. And that's why people like your good selves still come and gather in a room to hear about them and what the latest is, because there's something about them that calls to us on some level. Now, I'm not going to interpret each symbol for you tonight, because I don't do that. Some do, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I don't do that unless there's a very obvious connotation, because it seems to me that this is very subjective. You have to take this phenomenon on as you need it. You can project onto it whatever you need. That's actually been the biggest gift of all with this phenomenon, that it doesn't sort of tell you what to think. That unknown quality, the mystery at the core of it, is of course one of the most fascinating things, and you'll be in no more of a state of having answers at the other end of this than ever you were before, but it doesn't matter, because just to see the images again, I think it does something to us. Well, you see what you think. So let's start. Here we are, 2012. What happened this year? These are all of the UK formations as far as we know. Might be a few that have been missed, but all the officially listed ones, these are them. So it began on April the 15th at East Kennet in Wiltshire with this sort of floral design. April the 15th, pretty normal starting date. It tends to be somewhere between the 14th or the 17th of April every year, which is interesting because crops actually do come up before that, albeit a bit low, but that date seems to be quite important. And you can see here, obviously this is in oilseed rape, but it's quite low, and that's why the pattern doesn't show up so much. But oilseed rape formations, of course, are always very interesting because it's not an easy crop to just trample down without damaging it. And often you get these perfect bends at 90 degrees that are really worth seeing. So we had the usual flurry of early oilseed rape formations, April the 28th at Yarnbury Castle in Wiltshire. We had this stripy design. I think we can see that a little bit more carefully there. There we go. So they're not, well, never, I would say, the most sophisticated formations. It's funny, it's like the phenomenon paces itself. And it usually waits till the end or in the middle before it really starts to let the real fireworks go, and yet they're not without interest. Now this is a kind of very classical formation, May the 12th, Hannington in Wiltshire. You know, if you've been one of those people that's done the last 20 years or so with this, you will remember a time when this bit in the middle here, what you call a Celtic cross design, that was the most sophisticated it got. And we were very excited about that. And now, you know, we just accept that it's got loads of other stuff going on now. And by the normal standards of crop circles, this is a very basic design. But I quite like it when it goes back and makes little links to its past. And it's really worth finding some books and following the evolution of this phenomenon, seeing how the shapes develop, because I'm sure there's a little lesson in there somewhere. And even simpler, merely a ring in the crop. There we are, just a field away. May the 13th again, Hannington, Wiltshire, and there you can see the round barrow up there, and literally just a very simple ring in the crop. So it will go to different extremes. Sometimes it will be very simple, other times, as you will see, if you haven't already noticed, incredibly complex. So another sort of modest formation, May the 19th, this is at Wolfstone, near Uffington in Oxfordshire, where we've had a number of formations over the years. And yes, in case you were wondering, it was very near the White Horse. And there's the White Horse up the top there, of course, or dragon, or whatever it is. Some discussion about what it is, but it's called the White Horse. This is at Manton, June the 2nd. Now this is kind of like a very typical early June formation where it's starting to push into more sophistication, and these kind of broken rings, you know, it's sort of playing with our expectations, if you like. What does it mean? Well, this is the thing. Does it mean anything? It seems very specific, that is for sure. And this kind of broken ring theme is something that we have seen several times over the years, and here it is back again. And then we've got these bubbly eye-like things. So this is at Woodborough, Wiltshire, June the 9th. Wiltshire, of course, will, as ever, have most of the formations, but you will see a few other counties have some surprises. Now take note of these central eye motifs here, because you're going to see that come back in several formations that we had over the summer. And it's kind of weird, it's like they're all a bit rough. They're not the best formations you've ever seen, but something really like this eye motif, and it kept going back to it again and again. But always with that slight roughness around the edges, like we were getting the junior circle makers on these ones. But you'll see what I mean as we go through. And yet, there's something kind of cute about it. They're weird little sea creatures. So, Silbury Hill, June the 12th, and we had this design. if you were to map out where all the crop circles that have ever appeared have been, Silbury is going to be in the middle. It's the epicentre, I would say, of the whole phenomenon. And this connection with ancient sites is something you would again and again, like you saw with the White Horse picture. The running theory is that ancient man instinctively was aware of sort of the natural earth energies, all of those things, and they placed their sites where they did to tap into that. So, if crop circles are using something similar or tapping into that energy grid to create them, well, it stands to reason, of course, that they're going to cluster in the same places, which they certainly do. But Silbury is the world centre of crop circles. We didn't get anything that spectacular there this year, but nonetheless, just a few around the edge, and that was one of them. And we had this indeed, June the 13th at Silbury. One of those formations that appears over two different crops. So you can see there that there's a boundary and you've obviously got two different crops. My guess would be that's barley and that's wheat. And certainly barley tends to be quite ragged in the way it goes down, even in the best of formations. But it's certainly not the first time we've had a formation go across one or even two or three crops over the years. I think most famously there's one that embodied the entire T-junction in Wiltshire back in '93 and was in three separate fields. I thought it was quite a good one. But this is a small example of that this year, and there have been more spectacular versions over the years. And this is one of those designs where you've got flat crop, but then you've got a circle and a ring sort of left, if you like, standing up, as opposed to it being the other way round, which is quite interesting. So it's sort of therefore is sculpting within the main lay of the crop, and I like this like tiny little dot in the middle there. So this is something that you will see played with it in a few different formations. This is in Shropshire, not the world's best known place for crop circles, but they had a few this year. June the 17th, at a place called Little Wenlock. Little Wenlock. What does that make you think of? Oh, Little Wenlock from the Olympics. There it is. Or Big Wenlock, if you saw the stupid mascots jumping about next to these athletes who had just done an amazing feat. I had to put up with that standing next to them. But anyway, I just make this point here because it's a very tenuous connection, I know, but isn't it interesting? There was so much speculation about this. And if you don't really understand, by the way, why anybody thought something big and terrible might happen at the Olympics, it was because of the symbolism that was very kind of secret society, Illuminati, New World Order-y, because if you looked at the mascots, well, it was kind of similar to the all-seeing eye, as were the lighting entries all around the show. And I still hold that that's absolutely true, by the way. It can't be coincidence. There was so much symbolism in the stadium and where it was positioned, all of that. That still holds true to me. Something subtly was letting the world know who's really in control of this. But very happily they decided not to kill everybody this time round. And there is a lesson, because we did say at the last meeting, you've got to be optimistic as well. And indeed nothing did happen. Well, good. And it goes to show that you have to anticipate, or be ready to anticipate, potential big dark things going on, but it might not be as bad as you think either. And all the stuff going around the internet would have convinced you that we would all be dead by now. And you have to take some of it with a pinch of salt. But that doesn't mean it was all wrong. And it may well be that actually too many people cottoned on to the possibility something could happen, and therefore it helped prevent it. We will never know. But interesting thoughts nonetheless. And still at Little Wenlock, by the way, on June the 20th, we had this. Not the world's most spectacular formation, I grant you, and very low-looking crop, I would say there. Barely shows up at all. But, you have to make up your own minds. There is one mindset that says only the very simple circles are real, all the rest are man-made. But then in the next breath, the skeptics will say all the very complex ones are man-made, and therefore, so when you get something that's a little bit scrubby and a bit weird like this, where does that leave that? And some formations are not very geometrically nice, but they have interesting qualities in them. Does it mean they're man-made or not man-made? Answer, it doesn't mean anything. They are merely what they are. And unless you know absolutely what and who put it there, well, it's just a formation. And you have to take that on that level. We can't make a judgment just from pictures. Okay, June the 20th at Alton Barnes. So Alton Barnes, for many of you will know, it is pretty much where many of the big complex designs have arrived over the years. It didn't get that much this year, but this was one of the ones that it got, sort of a play on the flower of life design. Nice enough, but nowhere near as big and spectacular as some of the ones that we've had there over the years, of course. This was a bit of an odd pattern here, June the 20th again, just a little bit up the road at Orr in Wiltshire. And it looks a bit sort of logo-like. I mean, you have to wonder about some of these, because some look like big complex glyphs, others seem almost like to be logos, and indeed, well, at least one of them is, we realised the other night. So here you can see that eye motif's back again. So here we are at Milk Hill, Wiltshire, June the 25th. Milk Hill, home to many famous formations. And there you can see where those three bubbly ones were earlier on. Here it is back again. And it's kind of interesting. It's not without interest. You've got sort of diamond affairs going on within the lay of the crop here, but it's all a bit sort of rough around the edges, as all of those designs are. And yet they're obviously very, very fond of this symbolism. You know, that's a pretty large formation if you look at the tractor lines that it's crossing there. However, back to ringed circles, same day, June 25th, Cher Hill, Wiltshire. And you can probably see there, certainly at the front, that there's more to this than meets the eye. And when you can see what looks like sort of texture, well, that's probably because there is some texture. So it's then always worth having a zoom in and looking at the centres of them or the lay of the crop. So there you can see you've got your initial little spirally bit in the middle, but then it's been laid in blocks with sort of all sorts of like coggy type effects. So that's very nice, and often it's really worth looking more carefully at the way these formations are laid down, because there's more to them. And you'll see a few more examples as we go through here, but I think that's rather beautiful. Okay, well, what's this? Who knows? A weird thing wearing a clog by the look of it. June the 26th, Beckhampton. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? You think, okay, that's really weird. So, like, if you, for instance, were a person who's going to make one, would you make that? Or would you make something a bit more specific? I don't know. So that's where you have to say, I don't know, that might really matter to somebody. That might be the most important symbol in the universe. And we just go, there's a weird thing with a clog. So I don't know. You know, it's all part of the mystery. This is another not particularly fine example, but who the hell knows? June the 26th, Stanton St Bernard, many have arrived, and it's pretty poor really, but on the other hand, you just don't know, do you? We don't know what we're dealing with here. I mean, maybe we're dealing with a phenomenon that doesn't always work 100% every time. Maybe something goes to press the crop circle, making button on the UFO, and they get it wrong. And you get that. I mean, who knows? We just don't know. Or it's particularly poor plankery, but you're going to make your own minds up. Now, this is a curious one. I mean, it's got quite a lot of attention. This did actually make it into the Daily Mail, June the 29th, Stanton St Bernard, because it was described as a cathedral, or, you know, this spires business. It's supposed to represent some cathedral somewhere, but I never quite got really whether it did or not. This was one of those designs, and each year you get a few like this. Something decided that wasn't enough. And so, just a few weeks later, it changed, and then it grew a bubble. So there you can see the original formation, and then it grew all of this. And it's funny, but even that wasn't enough, so something went, it's not quite there, is it? And so, just a few days after that, then these long sort of spiky bits then appeared at the edge. And it's just kind of weird, isn't it? Because it's like, it doesn't really add that much, but something thought it was important to do that. So I was going, it's still not right. Yes, now it's right. So, you know, make of that what you will, but formations that evolve and grow, you seem to get a few every year, and that was one of them this year. Okay, July the 1st, back in Shropshire, in Lawley, kind of not unlike, but obviously much more primitive than the one we saw at Stonehenge earlier on there. And it's, as I say, not an area particularly well known for crop circles, fly, but it had a few this year. July the 1st at Waden Hill in Wiltshire. So here we see kind of a collection of flower of lives, if you want. What I quite like about this is at first glance you kind of get this illusion that they sort of have rings around them or edges, and then of course when you look carefully they don't. It's just all an illusion. When you look more closely, it's just each petal gives you a different effect. So it's rather nice, that formation. Not huge, but again, a lot of people seem to respond positively to this particular design. So, playing with three-dimensional form is something we've seen before, as you saw earlier, but this year we had this July the 1st at Chilcombe in Hampshire. Hampshire, lest we forget, once upon a time was the centre of the crop circle phenomenon. We all talk about Wiltshire now, but back in the 80s, more appeared in Hampshire than in Wiltshire, and then for some reason it sort of slowly crossed over. So here we are back in the old heartlands, but you can see this kind of see-through box, and it's quite clever in its way. It's not quite as precise as I want it to be, but I'm still impressed nonetheless by its ambition. And, well, you'll see that there's a play on a cube later on that took this on to a whole other level. So, here is another very sort of angular formation. So, again, at Chilcombe, July the 1st. And you've got all sorts of triangles upon triangles here. And I'm sure the geometry expert will tell us something very interesting about this. But once again, this wasn't good enough. This wasn't quite enough. And so something went, no, it's not quite right, is it? And so, a little while later, something decides to flatten these bits inside. Now, that then also has the interesting effect, you can see here, of that crop looking like a different colour. It's like somebody's coloured the crop. I can only imagine it's for some reason it's just come out in a different colour because it was a bit later. So, who knows why? And then suddenly it's sort of gone to become something slightly different to what it was. But yeah, that colour, that's an interesting one. That's a slightly new development. So when they start sort of coming out like bright red, that'll get really interesting. Well, what can you say? July the 5th, Lockeridge, Wiltshire. Well, allegedly, this was made by people, would you believe, to have a go at the people that run the Silent Circle Cafe down in Yatesbury because of some to-do or another. It doesn't really matter, not really. So there we are, the sort of caterpillar coming out with whatever it is. I'm sure there's some kind of mirror writing thing going on here. There's something in here that's probably a very rude message, so we won't interpret it. But there we go. So you also get ones like that as well. So the eye, here we go, the eye back again, pretty much the same motif, again a little bit rough and yet sort of not uninteresting. And you then get this pretty impressive crescent, this curve here coming down to a single line, and then you've got that little bit that was on the top of spires that we saw earlier on. So it's like you get these little connections which go, yeah, that's sort of meant to go with that, or that's responding to that one. When you put the connections together, it gets rather interesting. And then you've got this at the other end of the scale, very precise, very logically geometrical, and incredibly beautiful. So here we are in Warwickshire. Now, Warwickshire's been, over the last 2 or 3 years, gradually coming up the pop charts for crop circles. And it's had a few this year, as you'll see. So here's one, July the 11th. Also nice to see back in a few of these formations, just these little tiny dots or grape shot formations. Back in the early 90s, you'd often see these. You get a big mandala, and then next to them, a couple of little just dots in the middle of the field for no reason, as if the artist has gone, bing, just, poking the brush at the edge of the canvas. And they're rather sweet. So it's nice to see a few of those back this year, if you look carefully. And here is just a very small circle. So it's attracted lots of people in, isn't it? July the 12th, Extrahampton. If you're wondering why that looks a little bit rough, well, that's because there's been no attempt at all to create a lay that actually is swelled. And there it is close up, and it's just lots of tufts, seemingly just scrawled around in a random ways. I mean, again, why? I don't know, but it's different. It's not particularly attractive, but it's kind of curious. So, trying something a little bit different again there. At the other end of the scale, back to very geometric, very crisp, cookie cutter shape. I really like this. It's July the 17th at Yatesbury. Beautiful petaled flower. And I mean, you can see something of its construction here. So obviously, at some point, a ring has been laid down, and then this has been laid inside it. Now, the skeptic would say, as construction line. Others would say, no, it's part of the design. It's part of what it's trying to show you. It looks nice within that ring. Well, you have to make up your own minds, but it's certainly a very crisp representation. Very beautiful design. I do like that. So, another one where again it sort of leaves rings sort of within the flat crop itself. This is up in Telford in Shropshire, July the 21st. So it's certainly, it's funny, you get these counties, they suddenly spring up with formations and then it might go quiet again for a few years. But anyway, it was Shropshire's moment in the sun. If you look carefully, just at the edge here, you will see there is the remains of a previous formation. Now there it is close up, and you can see it's virtually growing out. What I think is interesting is nobody noticed that until that appeared next to it. So it got missed, and then it took this slightly more advanced one. They thought, oh, it's been left, so we'll make another one, and then they'll notice it, which of course everybody then did. Curious, sort of a parallelogram here at Alsbourne in Oxfordshire, July the 22nd. What's going on there? I don't know, but I mean, I'm always impressed by long, thin lines. You see long, thin lines, you think, God, that's really amazing. Could I walk a line that accurately, especially if it was across a huge distance? I don't know. And yet somehow there are these long, thin lines. And if you look carefully, you've just got these two tiny little circles down there. And there's one of them close up, this little central part. So, it decided, no, there's no proper circle. We'll have just a couple of little tiny ones in there, which is rather sweet. Again, three-dimensional form being played with here. July the 23rd, Longwood, Warren, Hampshire. Site of loads of old formations in the early 90s, late 80s, and been bereft for a long time by the odd one. So nice to get something back there. And again, it's like sort of electronic sort of door opening or a very sort of hard-edged flower, but very, very ambitious. Spot the formation. Just to make the point that some of these are very big, but some are very small. Here we are at Allington in Wiltshire, July 24th, and just if you look ever so carefully, in the middle of nowhere, for no reason at all, there is that. And it's amazing, so you think something went to the trouble of doing that, or somebody, or whatever you want to think, but they went to the trouble of it and just did that. You think, God, I would have done more than that if it was man-made. But equally, then you think, so if it was some other force at work, why, how, what, and it's not very good, but it still went to the trouble of doing it. And I don't know, give them some kudos for that, I think. So, back to very sort of angular sort of formations with, again, very thin lines, but this time more. And it has a sense of sort of 3D to it. It's almost like you're looking into a tunnel of squares kind of going back and back. July 24th, the Beckhampton in Wiltshire. Again, very old circle site. Always stuff going on there. Here's a field with a smattering of different things in it. July 25th, Fox Hill near Hinton Parva. They're not the best formations, but they're kind of worth a look. So there's one of them. A bit rough, but it's okay. Getting rougher, right in the middle, sort of bow tie. But then you come to the one that makes it, of course, all worthwhile, because every year you have to have one of these, and there he is, an ET face. Now, I think we've had an ET face or two every year for, the last few, certainly. And what's even nicer with this one is the lay of the crop. It's sort of like, it's like he's got a parting. It's like an alien with hair, and he's got a lovely, really nice parting. So that's rather sweet, that's nice texture in there. Some people, of course, believe, as we've seen, extraterrestrials are involved. Well, we just don't know. That this is the archetypal sort of representation that we all see now of an extraterrestrial, even if they didn't exist. Now they do, on some subconscious level in the collective, because either they are there or we've invented them. But either way, we can't deny them. So this is particularly interesting. So July the 25th, Windmill Hill, Wiltshire. Again, lots of famous circles there. This is very big and particularly impressive for the way it's made. Let's look at that arm bit a little bit more carefully there. So it's as if what you've got basically is like lots and lots of circles sort of superimposed on each other there, which then you can see, you know, the ring, you can see at some point what was laid down and then they overlay, and there's a central path there as well. But I just like that. I like the texture it gives. And if you look carefully, you will see in this ring here how the prop is swept out to the edges. So it's not just sort of going round, you know, in a circular fashion. It's swept flat. And I think we can see that even more closely there. There we go. So, I mean, you know, I know many of you here have been into formations. If you haven't, it really is worth trying. Because just to get a sense of scale, just every now and then, it really does make you think, whoa, these things really are huge. And how about this, for a weird formation? And yet I really like it. July the 26th, East Kennet. Now, the people I've spoken to who've been inside this one have said the lay inside was really gorgeous. So yeah, it looks like some weird squid. But actually, it was apparently very, very nice. And we can see some different shots here. So that's zooming in on the sort of bubbly bits in the middle there. And it's worth looking even further in. I mean, again, it's kind of weirdly random, apart from the central bit, and yet there's something very beautiful about the way those tendrils splay out across the field. And some of the centres of the circles were particularly gorgeous. And you can see here, for instance, you know, it's got that sort of fan effect as it lifts it above the rest of the crop, and this little central standing bit there. So, again, you might be inclined to look at an odd one and say, well, that's rubbish, but you look at the way they're constructed and there's beauty at a different level that's really worth more sort of close scrutiny. Odd little formation, or big formation, at Oliver's Castle, July 26. Oliver's Castle, famous Iron Age fort, of course. Also the site of the acclaimed video of the formation appearing, the only one we have, 96, still argued about after all these years, who the hell knows. Again, what's curious here though is that this kind of random bit, there's a few this year, you get a circle and then these bubbly tails, but they're kind of almost like smudge. And it's sort of an odd thing to do, but something that they keep seeming to do. Right, anybody who's into Chinese puzzles or anything, do tell us what this means. Hannington, July 28th. I mean, it's so specific, you have to think that must mean something. There must be some code or something here. You know, something's very, very specific about which boxes it's flattened and which have been left standing up. So I'd like to know more about that. It's not the first formation we've had like that over the years. And I know that one of them, a few years ago, Chris Hopper, bless his soul, he did some work with flashing messages into the sky and all that, and one rather like this appeared, and it turned out to be all about the sort of famous Circle of 9 grid and all of this. Very interesting stuff. So I think there's more to that than meets the eye. This is again a really gorgeous formation. July 28th, Etchelhampton. And what can you say? It sings. Some don't sing to you, but this sings. Well, it sings to me anyway. And it sings to projectile as well. If you look very carefully, we say this every year, right? And there's always one or two formations. And here's the latest one, where if you look carefully, there are wheel marks, like tractor lines, going right into the middle of the formation and across. Now, what does that mean? Has somebody visited the formation by driving into the field? It has happened. I've seen it done. I have seen it done. Well, maybe others might say, "Oh, they went in and they drove a vehicle and they made it with this weird vehicle." That's the other thing. But you know, it's like somebody's literally driven into the centre there. Probably not helped by that Doctor Who episode last year where a crop circle appeared next to the TARDIS. You see that? And they drove across the field in a car, and I thought the farmers would love that. Hey. This has a kind of logo-like quality to it. It's very different, really, to any of the other ones this year, but it's particularly interesting. You know, you could also see it as an eclipsed star, maybe. Something going on there. So all canning's July the 29th, but there's more to see, because if you look more carefully here, which again, you could sort of not give much time to that, but you then look in the middle, and it's really beautiful the way it's made. And you can see here this sort of beautiful S-shaped swirl, so it's not just a basic spiral. There's a lot of very lovely texturing going on there, which again, you can miss these, and if you really look carefully, you could not know it was there. So, well, I mean, I'm no expert on platonic solids, but this seems to have that platonic solid type look to it. July 29th, Owlsbury in Hampshire. Very crisp, very shiny and rather nice, but very precise in its execution, you cannot deny. Poppy fields, there we are. If you've ever wondered what a crop circle with poppies would look like, now you know. July 29th, Ogbourne Down. And I mean, obviously, it's a normal crop. Can't quite tell what crop it is there, but if you want to see a little bit more carefully, you can see it's got lots of poppies growing through it, so that's really beautiful. I'd love to see that. And yeah, that's really quite something. And just occasionally you'll get a formation in like flax or linseed or some other colour, and it's really overwhelming to see. You're in a field with a bright colour. It's really nice. This is a reconstruction of a formation that was chopped down before anybody managed to photograph it from the air at Windmill Hill, July the 31st. I imagine the original looked rather better than this. Some farmers now will chop them down as soon as one appears to discourage other people from coming into the field. Others, it's just harvest time and that's its luck, and it gets created and it comes down within hours. So nobody managed to photograph this, but this is a rendition of what they think was there. Which curiously has a kind of echo in a way in this design here. Avebury, August the 1st, and again you've got the eye motif, but this time without the kind of radiating lines, but you can see a little bit neater than the other ones, but that same play on this motif they just seem to like to come back to. And again, those sort of like jewel-like sparkles that we had on the tops of the spires earlier on. I would also draw your attention to the fact that these crescents, if you like, they get so thin, it almost just then melts away into nothing out in the crop there, which is rather nice. And just little subtleties, like there's a ratchet quality to it here. If you look here, and there's sort of a kink there, so it's ratcheted, it's not just a basic crescent. There's always a little bit more when you look carefully. Now, I'm often as impressed with simplicity as I am with complexity, and I particularly like this. August the 2nd, Wootton Rivers in Wiltshire. It's just a spiral, but it's a beautiful spiral. And I personally couldn't walk a spiral that precisely to create lines that thin. It is so even and so impressive, and it's just sort of basic, and yet there's something very nice about that. The eternal spiral, of course, we seem to come back to again and again in human symbolism. And again, we've got another formation that sort of smudges. It's like it's trying to do the James Bond beginning, the circle, and then smudging outwards. August the 4th, Pickford in Coventry in Warwickshire again. So, yeah, just kind of odd, really, but not uninteresting. And definitely not a crop circle. So here are some crop triangles at Owlsbury in Wiltshire on August the 5th. And what's particularly clever about this is it plays with perspective. If you look carefully, you'll see that the triangles sort of gradually elongate, and it plays with the eye. And you can see that if we zoom in a little bit more there. So it's very clever, and they've even laid very, very thin grooves, being God knows what, very thin grooves into the crop there. So again, there's more attention to detail going on here than at first you might think. So these very angular ones seem to pop up from time to time. Now here is one where texture is kind of the most impressive thing. So Staunton St Bernard again, August the 5th. You can see immediately there's lots of stuff going on here in the central part. So let's have a little zoom in on this one. So it's going closer, you can see all sorts of interesting stuff there. You see it more carefully in a moment, and these are like tiddlywink type sort of, again, like little overlapping circles within the flat crop itself. And I love it when they do this because it looks so nice. So there's the centre. And so you've got a very tight, very neat spiral in the middle. Then it's laid radially flat, and then you've got it again spiral, but with these little notches, little sort of bits that have just been laid radially again. So, there's something here very, very specific. It's worth going even closer into the middle of this because it just looks so nice, and there you can see how it works. So, again, it's often as much what you find inside that's as impressive as what you might see from a distance. By the way, if anybody's too hot or stuffy, do feel free to open a window, by the way. Quite neat. Right, Chestfoot Head, August the 9th. Now this, I'm told, is a Buddhist symbol, but I don't know if that's true or not, but anyway, it's certainly very impressive. This is the kind of symbol we've had over the years a few times, where you get the square with the mandala inside the circle, but this is a particularly fine example. Again, another sort of baby circle, and I would say probably two tiny baby circles even nearer, just outside of there. This is worth looking at more carefully as well. So it certainly makes nice 70s wallpaper, if nothing else. But there's a great consistency to this. Let's see me even closer. There we go. So a lovely sense of flow. And what's quite interesting also about this design is where it was. Because this was just over the border from the festival, pop festival, where my stepdaughter Katie was. And the interesting thing was, she said nobody knew this was there. So even though they got one of the best formations of the year over the boundary, nobody knew about it, had no consciousness of it being there at all. Chestfoot Head is also, of course, one of the old epicentres. Before it moved to Wiltshire, back in the 80s and 70s, this was where it used to happen. And not a lot's gone on there over the years, in the last sort of decade, but back to the homeland. And you can also see here, to take us right back to the basics of the old days, they've even included, look at that, a ringed circle. And once upon a time, that was all we had. In fact, even that was complex, because once upon a time, all we had was circles. But this is a newer kind of circle. August the 11th, Bishop's Cannings. Again, you can immediately see here that something's gone to a lot of trouble to create interesting textures. So let's see that more carefully. So you can see that you're right over the centre there. So, you've got sort of definite straight lines there, but then you've got these radiating bits and then bits that have just been laid flat in between them. So it does really make for a beautiful effect. Now you can sort of see more, like just getting a whole sense of it there. So I do particularly like that design. And so yes, it's a circle, but there is, of course, more than meets the eye. But that is just a circle. Here we are, August the 11th, Charlton and Wiltshire. So I know I say this every year, but for those who haven't heard me say it before, remember this. Back in the 1970s and 80s, this was all we had, and people wrote books about things like this saying, "Isn't this amazing?" And we go, "Oh, so cool." Think back, the evolution, the development of this phenomenon has been remarkable over the last 30 years. But certainly things like this, clearly, at least, have been going on for hundreds of years, as we saw that picture of the devil earlier on. So something took a phenomenon and then thought, we can do more with this, or it evolved itself. Because the interesting thing is, if, as some say, all the complex ones are man-made and all the simple ones are the real ones, why don't we get more circles anymore? Because we only get a very few little circles now. So why would that phenomenon have suddenly stopped if that was natural and something else began? So others say, no, there is an evolution and something's taken maybe a mechanism that was already there in nature and learned to use it to create symbolism. Maybe. Of course, it's just another theory. However, here's a circle that isn't a circle at all. So August the 12th, Devil's Den, again, ancient site, Stone Quoit, near Fifield in Wiltshire. So we get this, and again it's just kind of odd. It's like a bit of 30s Art Deco type stuff. You've got some nice loopy curtainy stuff going on here. It's a bit like a curtain opening, isn't it, in the theatre? But who knows what's going on there, but very specific. That was not random. It's something new what it wanted to do there. Back to Uffington, August 14th, or Wolfstone to be more precise. And they're in what I would imagine is pretty much the same field that we saw earlier on. we have this kind of weird thing, and it's sort of like a serpent coiled up, and although it's a bit sort of messy, I also kind of quite like it. There's something rather pagan and rather sort of basic about it. It's, I don't know, it's got something rather nice about it, I think. This is up in Warwickshire, Wapponbury, August 15th, of course not unlike certain designs we've had in years past. But again, to get one, of this sophistication up north, to our southerners, is unusual. But this is particularly lovely design. You can see a little bit more carefully there. You've got the standing tufts in the middle there. But it really is a beautiful formation. I believe that made it into a few newspapers as well. So there we go. Wiltshire doesn't get all the coverage. That's all I can show you of this one. Also in Warwickshire, August the 18th, Radford, Samil, I don't know how you pronounce that. No aerial shot. Looks pretty random there. Don't know what that is. But it is a formation that was apparently there. And this very rough. Apparently this is the logo for the Ministry of Sound, I do believe. August 19th, East Kent. If you don't know what Ministry of Sound is, you haven't been to enough clubs recently. Right, so it's an attempted logo, clearly. A bit rough and ready, it has to be said, but I suppose at least they tried. This, of course, has resonance with one of those additions you saw earlier on, but it is a separate formation. August 20th, back at Woodborough. Again, you've got a play on the eye design in the middle. Again, these sort of long, pointy bits coming into very thin points here, for some reason. Again, another design, can't show you any more than that. It's the only picture I've seen. August 21st, Dodworth, South Yorkshire. Dodworth rather than Dodsworth, which is a different place apparently. Yorkshire's not unknown for formations. Back in the mid-90s, had quite a few. And in fact, the last 2 or 3 years, there's been more stuff going on up there. This year, this is the only Yorkshire formation that I've heard reported, and I don't know what the picture of it was overall. That's all I've seen. Again, double ring circle, August 21st, Hackpen Hill in Wiltshire. Not much really, but just a few days later, Hackpen would come up with something just a little bit more impressive. Again, well, what can you say? Also at Hackpen, slightly weird, dodgy looking thing, but somebody might have been really pleased with that. Or it might be the most meaningful symbol that ever was. This again looks a bit more logo. That looks like a car logo. I can't quite put my finger on it, don't know. But anyway, August 23rd, Wanstead in Wiltshire. Again, very angular. And this is very nice. I do like this. So August 23rd in Stitchcombe in Wiltshire. What I quite like about this, and I've not really seen this done before, is so you've got kind of circles linked together with these bars, but it's like there's a circle behind it. It's like the Earth's imprisoned. There's a symbolism for you. I like that. That's unusual. I've not seen that played with like that before. And I think we could just see close up there one of the insides there. It was very beautifully made. Indeed. This was really the one at Hackpen that blew everybody away. August 26th, Hackpen Hill. And I'm pleased to say this was the formation that appeared on the night of my wedding to Helen, which took place that day. Well, this was the night. So we kind of rather selfishly took that as one for us, really. There we go. It has a sort of wedding-y look about it, but it's beautiful, isn't it? There's like stitching, and there's all sorts of stuff here, and there's all sorts of texturing and the so-called basket weave effect around the outside. So let's look at this a little bit more carefully. And the more you look, the more you see. If you look very carefully, you will also see a very thin crescent line coming inside here. So it's sophisticated on so many levels. Now there you can see in the landscape. There's the White Horse of Hackpen Hill up there. This feels have many important formations in it over the years. This oblique view gives you, I think, more of a sense of it, actually. There you can see. It really is beautiful. I mean, the stitchy bits are not as super accurate as you might want them, but the overall effect is really beautiful. It's very organic. And, there you can see how it's working there. So it's almost like Celtic. There's a Celtic quality to it there. And I would say this was certainly the formation of the summer, really. There you can see looking over it. And whilst, as you're about to see, there's been a few stragglers since. This pretty much, this felt like the end of the real season, you know, the peak of it. And there you can see the crisscrossing of the basket weave. So you've got basically flat bits and then like a checkerboard, another bit's laid from a different angle over on top of it. Very nicely done. Make note of that, because later on you're going to see one in another country which is very similar. And there's a close-up of how that's working there. So for many people that was the most impressive formation of the year, but we weren't quite done. And you'll see also in one of the overseas ones very shortly that there were others almost as impressive. So there were a few stragglers. August the 30th at All Cannings, next to the canal there, we had this. Kind of interesting, bit rough, bit ruined, I would suggest there. A very probable man-made formation here, September the 3rd, I've got. But then again, who knows? Maybe the ruler of the universe is called Laura. I don't know. We don't know. If anybody remembers Twin Peaks, maybe it's something to do with that as well. But anyway, that's for the real geeks. Well, there we go, it's there. Apparently it was made for an engagement, allegedly. And this, I would suggest, is in much the same vein, kind of naive. And this was the last formation we've had to date in the UK. September the 7th, Rochford in Essex. Essex, not unknown for crop circles, back in the mid-90s, had some lovely formations. Been a bit quiet there recent times. So, now that's the UK, but that's not, of course, the whole world. Before I conclude by just showing you some of what's happened elsewhere in the world, let's say this. There were expectations for this year, because of the 2012 connotations, that either it would present us with something so stunning that it couldn't ever follow it and then it would just stop, or that it would just not happen and it would peter out and nothing much would happen. Well, the reality of what we got is in fact somewhere in the middle. It didn't peter out, but neither did it present that final kind of statement that some thought it would because of 2012. Well, what I would perhaps say to that then is what that says is maybe it's not giving up just yet, and maybe we haven't reached the big peak that we thought we had. So maybe the phenomenon's going to be with us for a little while longer. But, of course, that's just England. Well, there is a whole planet beyond our shores, hard though it is to believe. And so let's have a look at the best of what's been going on there. The reality is we do, in England, get the best formations for the most part, with a few exceptions, and we certainly get the most. There's no question about that. That seems to be a reality. And some of the ones you see around the world are a little bit naive compared to us, but they still excite the people that live where they live. So let's see what's been going on. So South America, or nearly, in Mexico, had some interesting things early on. In fact, Mexico had the first formation of the year. That's the best shot I've seen of it. I think it's a ring circle, hard to say. That was on March the 7th. So as usual, as is often the case, the phenomenon kicks off in another country. And that's in Argentina. Simple single circle. So it does go on down there. When I spoke in Brazil 2 or 3 years ago, they were talking about all the formations they'd had. So they don't get them to the degree that we do, but clearly stuff does go on down there. It's more Europe that you tend to get more activities. Here's a smattering. These are not all. I'm just showing you just a few to give you an example of some of the countries that get them. So, you can't read at the back there. There's one from Latvia up there. Denmark here, France there, Macedonia. France is interesting because it's only just over, the border from where we are here. It's not a big deal, and yet they hardly get any, even though they've got big stone networks like Karnak and all of that. But there's something about it that doesn't attract as many as we do. That's a bit wobbly, and yet I'm really impressed with that. There's something very interesting about that. That's the best shot I've seen of it. Unfortunately, they're not really used to photographing crop circles, so you don't get many great aerial shots, but I find that very interesting. What about some other countries? Well, here's a few more. Norway, this formation here. Belgium, that. Poland, that's like a classic dumbbell formation that you might have got back in the early 90s here. And kind of a weird thing there in Slovakia, but compared to the masterpieces we get, we tend to be a bit sniffy about the overseas formations. But you've got to understand, for them, for some countries to even get any formation at all is an amazing thing. And you read their accounts of them and you read their responses, and they're on top of the world because they've had any formation. And it makes them think, and it takes them on the journey that we all take for granted, that we've been on for a long time with these wonderful formations. That is the journey of thinking outside of the box, thinking about what could make this phenomenon, what could it mean, and then having to sift all the different options. Of course, takes you into yourself, but also out of yourself, and onto whole other levels of being. That's the marvellous thing about the crop circle as well. These take them on that journey too. Switzerland had a number of interesting formations over the last years. This isn't as good as I've seen there, but nonetheless, not without interest. There's a couple they had this year. And that's, this kind of idea, clover leaf, is something we've seen in Britain quite a few times. The Czech Republic. Now, Czech Republic, back in the mid-90s, late 90s, they were getting a lot of formations, a very sort of thriving research community. Well, it's gone very quiet in more recent times until just this year and last year, and it started to revive. So here's a few that they've got. And again, they're kind of a bit squiggly and naive, but then others are more interesting. We just don't know what we're dealing with here. Remember, if it's a psychically interactive phenomenon, and actually we're making them without realising it, maybe this is sort of really random feedback and it hasn't organised itself yet. Or maybe they're very bad clank people, or maybe it's just reflecting some lack of energy in the same way out there, perhaps. But it's doing the best it can. We just don't know what it means. Netherlands. Now this is an interesting one because the last few years most of the Netherlands formations tend to be these sort of fairly modest formations in grass, and nearly all of them are around the house of a guy called Robert van der Broek. Now this is a big controversy because back in the earlier days clearly some interesting things did go on around this guy's house, crop circles. That's when Nancy Talbot claims she watched a crop circle forming. She's a researcher, and I would be inclined to go with her on that. But as the years have gone by, the claims around this guy's house have got wilder and wackier, and now he's producing all sorts of photographs of poltergeist activity, which a lot of people think are dodgy. Now, I can't tell you if they are or not, but it does make me laugh, because it has got to amazing levels now, where he is now apparently channeling dead crop circle researchers. And what I really like about it, he's getting them to slag off their old mates, to say, you were wrong about this. Isn't that brilliant? And you really then have to think, hang on a minute, that's a bit irresponsible, isn't it? Never mind anything else. So I have to tell you, a lot of people are really attacking the whole thing now, and I just don't know what's going on. The pictures certainly look pretty dodgy to me. I don't know is the answer. But, of course, therefore, he's been accused of making all the formations around his house. That's all I can say. That is the accusation. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not true. This is the only fully formed formation that we've had this year in the Netherlands, so for the most part, that's what we had there. Italy, on the other hand, now Italy has had the nearest kind of formations to England over the years, and some are a bit naive, but ones like this, well, I mean, that's phenomenal, and would not in any way be out of place in an English field. And certainly over the last couple of years, Italy's produced real humdingers every now and then. And it didn't quite get the humdinger this year, but it certainly had some interesting stuff. There's two more from Italy. This, I mean, it's got to have some kind of astronomical theme to it. I mean, it's very specific. Incredible the way that arm comes out there and then just so beautifully sort of spirals in there. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on here. It looks a bit odd, but I think it's beautifully constructed. So that must have some meaning. This is very interesting as well, like a Nautilus shell maybe. Germany, over the years, has kind of fluctuated. It, at one point, almost challenged England for the numbers of formations, but that didn't last long. But every now and then they get some, and here's a couple of interesting ones from this year. The one that everybody's been talking about from Germany this year was this one here, which you could easily just think was an English formation. It clearly has the same connotations. It's big, it's beautiful, it's got the basket weave, the notching effect around the outside there to a very fine degree. And this is in Bavaria, which of course got conspiracy theories going, because the Illuminati originally originated in Bavaria, we're told. So for them to get a formation that got tongues wagging, it probably means nothing, but who knows? Here's the inside, and you can just again see, how this is working here with the crisscrossing. I think there's one more shot of that, and you can just see what's going on there. And that is not an orb, by the way. I do believe that is a lens flare. If you want to believe it's an orb, you can believe it. I don't know. So this, I think, makes a little connection with the formations over here. It's funny, it makes all the global formations suddenly feel more unified when you get that sort of like, oh, that's definitely coming from the same place that the ones we're getting here are getting. Because there's lots of debate about that. That's why the skeptics say, well, it's just local hoaxes. That's why you get the themes in different countries. But others say, well, it's reflecting something of the mindset of those people there. And maybe there's something to that. But every now and then you get one like this that seems to join the dots. And it makes you think, okay, there's something more unified at work. There's one country we've not mentioned, well, there's two actually. One is Russia, which didn't seem to get any formations this year. But the other big country we haven't mentioned, of course, is, if I can get the button to work, there we go, the USA. Now, the USA is kind of weird, isn't it? There's loads of interest in the crop circles, and lots of researchers are into the whole phenomenon, but they often have to come over here to spend their summers looking at them because they get so few over there. America basically gets 1 or 2 formations a year if they're lucky. Well, the only one I've heard about this year is this one. It's beautiful in many ways. I mean, there's a triangle thing in the middle here. I don't know what crop this is. It could be maize, but it looks too low. But the grooves in the crop, I think, are really interesting. So, why does America get so few when England gets so many? This is the big question. Over the years, people have argued, is it that we've got the right mindset to tell people about this phenomenon? Is it that aliens don't like Americans? Is it geology? What is it? We don't know. And yet it's interesting, isn't it? But I'm going to make a very scurrilous and tenuous connection here. I just thought it was curious that this year America got 1 formation and another country also got 1 formation, which was Iran, which got its first crop circle. Not the best crop circle in the world, that is the same as that, by the way, it's just overhead. But I just thought, hey, so that's quite nice. America and Iran are clearly squaring up to each other, and all the Israel threat about nuclear attack and all of this. But, in the eyes of the circle makers, the USA and Iran are equal. And I kind of quite likes that message. Because I think we are moving into dangerous times. I think, there is a ratcheting up of this East versus West. Yeah, all right, West, aren't we? The Islam versus, whatever, Christianity or Judaism, all of this. These polarities seem to be falling into place at the moment. And yet, I think that we have to maintain a perspective. Those that can see what's going on, I think, have to find a middle ground. And I quite like the fact that the phenomenon has never really responded to anything that's that big and heavy. Like when we had 9/11, lots of people tried to read 9/11 symbolism into the crop circles, and there wasn't really any. And like the Olympics, lots of people were expecting the Olympic logo or something we might have something to say about, but it didn't. It's like, that's not really relevant to us. That, or they were worried about being sued for copyright infringement if they use the Olympic logo. But I think there's a kind of a lesson here, that no matter what's going on in the tangled world of human affairs, the phenomenon seems to keep going, and it produces beauty. And it reminds us that no matter what dark stuff and difficult stuff's going on in the world, you've always got the option of going to something beautiful, something that seems other than that, which somehow calms you and just takes you back to a more sort of centralised place within yourself. I think that's what the crop circles do. whatever else they may be, whatever else they may mean, they provide a kind of a calming point. And certainly if you've ever stood in one or sat in one, you will have experienced that. There's something about them that gives you perspective. So I'd like to think, therefore, that what this phenomenon is doing for us at the moment is, because there's so much talk about what might come in the future, but it's giving us another option. It's saying, yeah, all right, that's going on, but we're not going to really rise to that. We're not going to give you big doom-mongering formations. We might show you dates and times and stars and planets, but that's as far as it goes. So where does this go next, of course, remains to be seen. Will next year we see a decline of the phenomenon? Will it keep going on much the same as it is now? We don't know, of course. But I take heart from the fact that it hasn't retreated this year. Much better year than last year, in fact, numbers-wise. We're up by quite a bit in England from last year. And I would say quality-wise, last year it all felt a little bit sort of like on the back foot. But there's been enough formations in amongst the weird squiggly ones to make you think, yeah, this is really still worth following. Are they made by aliens, natural forces, people? Well, you have to decide that. The truth is, as we said earlier on, nobody knows. And you can think what you want to think, but let's stop the savage arguing, because I think the phenomenon speaks of being outside of all of that. And we can use these, if you wish, for whatever we want, and that is right and proper, no matter what you decide. So I'd like to thank all the different photographers here, because obviously we've robbed all sorts of images here from various websites, but particularly cropcircleconnector.com. Support them, click on them, follow the work of the different photographers. There's a lot of people out there doing fantastic work recording this, and we do not take it for granted here, and we pay full tribute to them. So that was the year that was, and well, yes, we shall see what we get next year. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you. If anybody has any burning questions, there's a couple of minutes if anybody has something to say. Or maybe you're just burning. Right, yes.
We've had what we call the cathedral, which I came and went round at your trip.
Hold on, guys. Yep.
And we were fascinated that there's maybe 3 bits, or 3 goes. Is this a common phenomenon, or is it something that's out of the ordinary?
It is quite common to get a formation that will grow in stages, but when I say common, not common as in every other formation does it, but every year you'll get 2 or 3 formations that will do that. I mean, there's one I can think of, I can't remember what year it was, somewhere about 6-7 years ago, which grew virtually every night for about a week and a half. And another bit would grow and another bit, and it gradually sort of became something completely different to what it was. That was more unusual, but it does happen. And yeah, it's not something that's unheard of, certainly. Yes?
What's your favourite theory about how they're made?
What's my favourite
Your
theory?
favourite theory.
I honestly don't know.
Or your
It's the
personal
truth.
opinion.
I don't have an opinion. Anybody, you talk to Barry or anybody that's been involved with this for a long time, and if anything, I'm less sure now than I was 21 years ago about what's going on. I've always maintained, and I still feel, that the ultimate answer will be a blend of a different, of lots of the different options. I don't believe they're all man-made. How many are man-made is impossible to say unless you're there when they're making them. How can you say? It's an arrogant sort of standpoint to say, I know it's this percentage or that percentage, unless you've studied personally every single one. Well, we haven't. Who's got the time for that? There's so much you need to research. And even if you did, it still doesn't reveal really what's going on. Even if you watched a formation appearing out of nowhere in front of your eyes, it still doesn't tell you really what the trigger for that is. So
what's your favourite theory?
I don't have a favourite
You don't
theory.
have
I honestly don't know. No. I know, everybody always thinks I'm hiding some secret sort of idea. I can only make observations. It seems to be interactive with human thought. it seems to have a connection to natural forces, but equally the eyewitnesses seem to describe objects and things coming down. So I don't know, it's going to be some weird combination, and I doubt we'll ever know. I'd be very surprised if we ever find out. If we did, it would be lovely, but at the same time, the mystique of that unknown quality is part of what keeps us talking about them, I suppose, so, you know, we can't complain. Yes?
Two things. There wasn't an infant rings crop circle. It wasn't a laid one, it was a planted one.
That doesn't count.
Okay. Anyway, there are pictures of it on one of the websites. What are your views on the military's still claimed disinterest, and yet the Chinooks and Apaches continue to hover over the circles, and in fact hovered over me as I was at the moment of being harvested, Milk Hill and St Bernard.
I mean, the age-old military question, what do the military know, and are they even behind it? I mean, someone said they're making the circles as some weird, let's make everybody think aliens are coming double bluff. Well, maybe, but that's just a theory no more supported than any other theory we have. Are they interested? Yes, I think they are. We've heard over the years that the MOD has mounted investigations and concluded it wasn't all man-made, etc., etc. But are the helicopters that we see over the fields of Wiltshire anything to do with anything that nefarious? Probably not. Because we need to remember that you've got Salisbury Plain up the road, they do train pilots in that area. They use the Vale of Pewsey to train helicopter pilots. And we've had word back from the pilots to say, yeah, of course we go around them. We actually encourage our pilots to centre around them and hover in low, because it's just a great thing to use. And we're interested. Now, the trouble is, each year, if you're in there, it can be quite intimidating. And if you are worried that there is some big military project to frighten us all off crop circles, of course, it can feel, I think, like that. I don't think that's what's going on. I think you're just seeing the natural military activity that would be there, even if the crop circles weren't. That doesn't mean nothing weird ever goes on. There have been claims of helicopters chasing balls of light across the fields and all of this, so I think sometimes they do see something that they do then pursue. But my suspicion is they don't know more any than we do what's going on. I think they'd like to. But my feeling, my gut instinct is they don't really know. They, I am sure, must monitor it properly and keep an eye on it and keep tabs on it. Of course they do. They're not going to ignore something that's got the ability to do that out of the blue. And I'm sure they'd love to have the same ability. But, you know, there's no way of proving it, unfortunately, or not yet. But, yeah, the helicopters thing, it can be a bit scary, but I think we have to be careful what we read into that, because that's kind of where they live, as it were.
Andy,
yes.
20 odd years ago, as you will recall, we were getting quite a lot of formations in Sussex. Why have they gone away? The other question is, what about the snow circle, which appeared in Hastings a couple of years ago? Have you got any views on that?
I don't actually know anything about the snow circle in Hastings, so that one totally passed me by. But I mean, there are snow circles and ice rings that you hear about, but you have to tell us more about that.
Picture of it.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, no, that I don't know about.
But what's gone wrong with us in Sussex? We're not getting it.
Or what's gone right with us in Sussex? Let's look at that two ways. I mean, it's a really interesting question, because back in the mid sort of 90s, well, early 90s onwards into kind of like 99, early 2000, we got probably 10 or 11 formations a year, and some were amazing. I mean, really, really good. Maybe not quite on scale of the Wiltshire ones, but, you know, really worth investigating. And, you know, people like Barry and myself spent a lot of time, you know, looking into them, and we concluded that a lot of them were really good formations, basically. And then it petered out. But the interesting thing is that I think this is where I believe there is an interactive quality. They seem to cluster initially when Paul Bura and his psychic circle kicked off down in Lancing in about 91, 92. We're trying to tune into the crop circles, and that's when we got involved with doing psychic experiments, and all sorts of stuff went on. Brilliant formations appearing seemingly on days when we were having our first meeting, out of the blue. It seemed like it was responding. And then, as the years went by, that work kind of stopped. We felt it had gone as far as it could really go. If you want to know about it, by the way, it's not in print anymore. Go onto eBay and find a copy of Quest for Contact. there's a little book we wrote back then, which tells you all about what we did. And so there's a few copies floating around if you want to find out the full story. But it kind of fell apart. Paul went to live up in Wales for a while, and we basically, well, real life took over. You know, we carried on being interested, but that time that we would spend really interacting with the phenomenon started to back off. And I think it backed off us as we did. And it wasn't that we didn't want them. Now, is that arrogant? Is that a little bit self-centered to say that I think that's something to do with it? It might be, and yet I wonder. Because no other group put much into crop circles. We were pretty much the only people really focusing attention on it. And when I never lost my interest, as you can see, but when we had to deal with the rest of life, it sort of thought, it was almost like, okay, you've done enough anyway, we'll leave you to it for a while. Every now and then we get one. We had one at Goodworth 2 years ago, I think it was the last one that I know of. Near the racing track place there. So every now and then you'll get one, but no, it's almost as if it's decided it doesn't need to be here. And we're not the only county that's done that to. Other counties have suddenly had lots of crop circles, like the East Midlands, similar. Back in the mid-90s, the East Midlands had lots of crop circles, and they had people like Richard Smith and Karen Douglas and loads of people up there, Nick Nicholson, working on the formations, interacting with them, and it seemed to respond. And then they all moved south, or eventually Nick died. You know, it dispersed. And suddenly, whatever energy they were holding seemed to go with it, and then that died as an area. So I do think there is something to this interactive process. And that's been true of other areas as well. You look at the years where there's lots of activity and research, it seems to respond, then it dies away. Make of that what you will, but I suspect something like that's gone on in Sussex as well. So if anybody wants to start getting out there and doing some serious experiments in the fields, be interesting to see if it responds. But I almost feel it's as if it's no, so we know you're interested now. We don't need to keep giving you formations, you know. Bloody hell, how much do you want from us? That was the feeling I got from it. But I mean, it'd be very nice to have one. I don't say it wouldn't be. It'd be lovely. But we shall live in hope. Maybe they're all down in Hastings mucking about in the snow. Sorry.
Is it therefore not necessarily related to being on chalk? East Midlands, I mean, it's not chalk, is it? So, and all these other places.
It's not always chalk. I showed you the Southern England map because that's a very fine example of how the primary aquifer of that region attracts the most. As you go up north, it's not chalk, but you get other aquifers. And it always, I mean, Nancy Talbot and the BLT research group did a lot of work on this, looking around the world. It always follows the pattern of the main aquifers in any given country, but it's not always chalk, of course. But down in the south of England, where most of them appear, chalk is absolutely, you can see, you know, it's the main area for them to appear for whatever reason. Yes?
Sorry. So far the evidence would be quite anthropocentric. Do they sort of think over naturally occurring grasslands or things like marshes, like reed beds and things like that? And we said we do any evidence for it happening on those sorts of places.
So the question there is, do crop circles appear basically in natural mediums as well as man-made crops? They do, but I would say to a lesser degree. I mean, we've had them in like bracken and wild grassland and even heather on occasion, not locally, but in this country. They're quite rare, and what is interesting is when you look at the pictures of, say, like the grass formations, of course, it just doesn't look that good, and the wind blows and it's gone in a couple of days. So it may be there are more formations in natural mediums than we actually know about, and they just don't really get seen so much. But that said, my feeling, looking at the amount that appear in normal crops, as it were, is that something is targeting that as a perfect canvas to make shapes. You know what I mean? So my feeling is that there is something behind it that seems to want to know that it's going to look the best. Hence, it doesn't waste too much time mucking about with other mediums. So yes, it does sometimes happen, but on a more rare basis. Yes?
I was just wondering, that one that you said was like a Chinese puzzle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking at it. You know those things that you see on products that you're supposed to use your iPhone for?
Oh, well, you scan your mobile phone. Yeah. I don't think it is. I know what you mean. Yeah, I don't think it's quite got the right pattern for that. We'll try scanning it and see what happens. It turns out to be a big advert or something. So. But that's the kind of work, you see. This is what we need you all to do. So you've all seen these. If you're on the internet, you can go and look at them again easily. Do some work with them, play with them, look at them, stick it on your wall and think about it, or experiment. I think we've all gone into this kind of phase of sort of being, we're all sort of hobbyists now, and we love looking at them, but we don't really do anything with them. And the more people that sit and work with them and think, what could we do with this design, what could it mean? Things might come out of that could be really amazing. So yeah, things like that. Somebody do some work, it'd be lovely. The problem you get is that there is limited time, of course. But if each person just did one thing and just followed one little line, it would be interesting to see what would come out of it. And there was a huge burst of that back in the 1990s when the phenomenon seemed like very new, and that's kind of died down over the years. But it would be nice to encourage more of that kind of work again. I mean, I do like, if you go onto Crop Circle Connector and you go into their pages where people speculate about them, it's nice, there are people doing that, and they'll read the most amazing things into the worst looking formations ever. But that's lovely. And why not? I mean, why not? They might be onto something, you know. So it's good, it's firing our imagination to go inside and see, you know, what we think's going on with the universe around us, and you can't take that away from it, even if they're wrong.
Andy, had you picked up that there was the number 12 in a lot of those rock formations?
Yeah, I know one of the formations you mean. I mean, I hadn't
12
particularly made the connection, but yes, that's true, isn't it?
12 leaf flowers there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, one of them certainly is. Well, there we are. Go and look at them. Play with 12. See what you get. Yeah, maybe there's something in that. Interesting. And certainly, if you look back at the development of the geometry for years, it went in stages. It played with obvious like six-fold geometry and that, and then people like Michael Glickman started to say, okay, we've never had, I think 9 we hadn't had for a while, have we? And there were some other 7 it didn't play with for a long while, and then suddenly one year you get the 7-fold, and then you got the 9-fold, and the geometrical lesson has suddenly gone a little bit deeper, and it gradually unfolds. And I'm sure that's still going on, but I think a lot of people have taken their sort of eye off the ball with that. So great people like Alan Brown, who used to do amazing work, you know, he's off on other things now. So it's a shame. So we need more people back like that who have the understanding to do it. Because I don't have the geometrical understanding that some people do to really follow that kind of stuff. What we're seeing in the fields are the basic patterns. For every formation you showed there, you could show endless pictures of the inherent geometry, and there are levels and depths to each one of these that we're just not seeing. We're just seeing the pretty pictures and fields. That work is there to be done, and I really encourage anybody with just the interest or the time to have a go. See what you can come up with, and post it up for the world to see on the internet, and share some thoughts. And from this, you know, maybe this is the global brain gradually evolving. You know, not everybody in the world's ever going to be into crop circles. We represent probably 1% of the population who even know about this. But for those whose lives it's touched, it's been really significant. And so therefore that can have a little domino effect on everybody else just by the thinking that's been encouraged by these incredible shapes. So, you know, I've always maintained that's the most important thing. That we should use that. So if it makes you think a bit differently or makes you feel a bit differently, we'll share that with others. Don't hide your light under a bushel, as the Bible says. You know, let's get word of it out there. Yes, last question, and I think we'll.
I'd be very interested to know if anybody can transpose the image of this year's Avebury Triple Serpent onto the 1994 cobweb.
Good, go and try it.
And tell me if it's in exactly the same position and the same size in the field.
Well, that you'd have to find a survey. I mean, again, that's the kind of information that might be available from the early 90s, because people used to record that. Whether it's available for today's formations, don't know. But yeah, the exact positioning of a formation, even in a field, that in itself can be interesting, it can be significant. That Stonehenge formation from 96, the one that appears to have arrived within 45 minutes, what was interesting about that was the central circle was right at the very top part of the field. It was a domed field in effect, and it was at the top. And there were all sorts of alignments with the edge of the fields and the copse of trees there and all of that. And if you don't think about it, you don't know how much is going on. And it was extraordinary, and it wasn't chance. But equally, you know, the thought that it had even gone to the trouble of doing that, and nobody even noticed for the most part. is again one of the most impressive things about this phenomenon. Because the more you look into it, the more you find these depths, and most people don't even see it. But it is there to be discovered. So go and work with it, go and find out. And you see, that's your task, you see. Go and follow it up, precisely. If each person follows up something they want to know, that's where the learning is going to come. Good luck, and tell us what you find. Okay, listen, we're going to close. You've all been lovely. Thank you so much for being here. As I say, our next meeting is November 22nd, Bosnian Pyramids. If you want to see the next stuff, up here on the table, come and have a look. A few things somewhere on the rack there, some leaflets and stuff. And if you want to come and join us for a drink at the Potters, that's where we're going to be going very shortly. And if anybody feels like stacking some chairs as well, it'll be lovely. Thanks very much. Goodbye.
The information where unknown forces strike the edge of ecology.